that the country plunged into a recession. This with a surprise 0.7% contraction in the second quarter of the year. The rand reacted negatively to the StatsSA publication yesterday and weakened to above 15 rand to the dollar. For more on this, we are joined by Maura Feddersen, Economist of Waterhouse. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
First of all, since we heard this news, should we be worried?
It is certainly concerning news, but perhaps not surprising given the poor fundamentals that we are seeing in the economy at the moment. But still, economists did expect a mild expansion in the second quarter of 0.6% according to the Reuters survey of economists. However, unfortunately, instead we fell into the first recession since the global financial crisis of 2008 and 2009. The biggest detractors from economic growth were agriculture, transport, and trade. And in the trade sector specifically, we are really starting to see how under pressure the South African consumer is.
Yeah, so at the moment, how have the markets been reacting since yesterday up until now, and especially during afternoon trade?
So immediately after StatsSA released the news, the rand weakened by 25 cents against the dollar, from 15 to 15.25. And today the rand weakened even further, breaking through as a barrier of 15.50. Which essentially means over the last couple of days, the rand has weakened over 3.3% against the dollar. And while, of course, the negative news was a key driver behind that, it is also important to contextualize this in the context of a heightened sense of risk associated with emerging markets. If you look at the situation in Argentina and Turkey, for example, investors are moving capital out of emerging markets into safe havens like the US dollar at the moment, and this is adding to the rand's troubles at the moment.
So when it comes to sentiment in real terms, can we conclusively say that South Africa is a no-go area in terms of investment? And how will this change? Because this is happening at the time when South Africa is also talking investment in China as we speak.
Absolutely. And President Cyril Ramaphosa has been on a number of investment drives. And so we've got investment deals with Saudi Arabia, China especially prominent this week. And so definitely that needs to now translate into higher fixed investment in South Africa. Gross fixed capital formation still shrank in the second quarter by 0.5%. That is very disappointing. And so these investment deals now need to translate into truly higher fixed investment spending, because that is perhaps the most important ingredient for higher economic growth.
Does this prevailing sentiment count in as far as ratings agencies are concerned?
It probably does. So Moody's came out recently to say the pace of fiscal consolidation in the country is not quick enough. And furthermore, given the poor economic results released yesterday, it is quite possible that Moody's would downgrade South Africa's credit rating. That would plunge South Africa's local currency credit rating into non-investment grade, which would mean South Africa would potentially have to leave the World Government Bond Index. That would lead to an outflow of capital from the country and might lead to further weakness in the rand.
Well, given the dismal performance of various sectors of the economy, are we likely to see the economy self-correcting, given that if the stakes are very, very low for investors, they would disinvest? And when you look at the market performance of commodities as well, do we see South Africa emerging out of this in a short term?
It's certainly possible. Mining has rebounded perhaps to some extent. showing positive growth in the second quarter, certainly helped by the weakness in the rand. The platinum group metals, vegetable products, those exports have been on the rise, and certainly exports as a whole have also recovered in the second quarter. After contraction in the first quarter, exports increased by 13.7%, and so the weakness in the rand there certainly helps, and there's certainly a number of glimmers of hope across the economy.
But then if there's a glimmer of hope, what do you say to the volatile price of oil? I mean, Brent crude right now continues to be unstable.
South Africans certainly need to anticipate that the oil price might continue to rise. Recently it touched on $80 a barrel. Plus you've got the weakness in the rand. In combination, that might lead to increased fuel prices soon. So it is certainly difficult conditions for South Africans at the moment.
But South Africans, should they take this as a surprise, as you were using the word anticipation? You'll remember in 2008, the oil price was at some time $110 per barrel.
The oil price is notoriously difficult to forecast, and of course the oil-producing countries, including OPEC, have a strong influence on where the oil price goes. Now, recently they said that they would stimulate production, which should lead to a moderation in the increases in fuel prices, but of course it is difficult to anticipate. And unfortunately, as a small, open economy, South Africa is very much exposed to movements in international sentiment. And so it is important that domestically we essentially have our house in order to attract the most investment possible.
So what do you make about, or rather make of this notion that the South African government is absorbing the effect or the impact of the oil price, the petrol price increase on consumers?
It's certainly something that could give some reprieve to South African consumers at the moment. They already faced an increase in VAT prices from 14 to 15%, and the burden is simply growing. And in addition to the absorption of the fuel price increases, there's currently a 9-member VAT panel investigating what products could be potentially added to the list of VAT-exempted products, potentially mitigating the impact of the increase in VAT for South African consumers. Okay,
only parting short, consumers, should they expect another increase in the petrol price as Economist had already predicted?
It is certainly a question what is going to happen going forward. Would government potentially absorb further increases in fuel prices again, or is this a once-off intervention? And the risk, of course, being that if the oil price goes up further, the rand might weaken. Would that mean that there could be a really large increase coming in a number of weeks?
All right. Thank you very much for making time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, Maura Feddersen.